Hey y'all, it's Wildcat6305 coming at you from Ike's Treehouse outside of Augusta, Georgia. Today I'm doing the part one of my house rule series. I actually kind of doing this George Lucas style. I rolled out part two a couple months ago. I thought that was part one, but since this is going to be that's actually now going to be part two, the video that's posted, and this is now the new part one, and this is going to be a four-part series. One part going over my house rules, and three parts going over my R&D rules. And from my table of contents, you can see I have it broken down such. I have my house rules, I have my R&D rules, and a little intro to that. So that's two videos, and then going over the technology. That'll be the fourth and final video. So just wanted to get that, and but before we get into it too much, one thing I do want to say is acknowledgments that I have in the back of my rule book, of my house rule book. Just want to say thank you to everybody that's been posting videos on the community, on YouTube, and sharing on accessandallies.org. Just all the inspiration that I've gotten through these past couple months, getting my house rules together and just kind of seeing different styles of play and different ideas. Just to name a few: Young Grasshopper, General Hand Grenade, Dracunsler, the Hilltop Pillbox, Sour Blood, historical board gaming, Access and Allies community, and then a couple of guys, Law Dog 13 and NS Sting. Those are my two buddies who have spent hours proofreading and helping me out, just make sure it makes sense. Trying our best to make sure we're not breaking the game entirely. But that's my house rules, and let's get started on it. Oh yeah, and one thing about my house rules, you can mix and match the house rules as you want. I like to play with the full gambit of house rules. This is just kind of the recipe I like to follow. But as I said, you can mix or match however you like. Going forth, they all pretty much kind of stand alone on their own. But the first rule I want to cover is amphibious assault modifications of what I did. Essentially, there's three parts: division of forces, the naval combat, and then the landing. And in the landing, I added an attacker penalty. So I got a little example set up for us to look at here. And obviously I'm going over with something completely made up, just to kind of keep from distracting, maybe, or maybe I'm distracting the other way of how did the Germans get French Equatorial Africa, but who knows. Anyways, let's get going at it. So the first thing that we're covering is division of forces. Division of forces, what does that mean exactly? Well, we all know out-of-box rules with amphibious assaults. If there is a sea battle that you cannot bombard, so your cruisers, your battleships have bombardments to them, so you can't bombard if there's a naval battle that takes place prior to. And I just realized this destroyer, I grabbed the old destroyer, sorry. Okay. So where was I? So you can't bombard you can't have an offshore bombardment if you have a naval battle that takes place. And in this scenario I set up, I put a German cruiser out here just to kind of demonstrate the sea battle. Well, let's say that cruiser wasn't even there. Let's take that cruiser out. Well, now forgot one more setup here. Now we have operational air base, and we have four aircraft up here, 2 fighters and 2 tactical bombers. So say the German player decides to scramble the 2 fighters and one of the tactical bombers. Well, now that forces a sea battle as well. there were no boats, there were no enemy ships out here to make a naval battle, but they scrambled and created a sea battle, and then that took away the defenders or the attackers' advantage of the offshore bombardment or that extra one free hit. Well, that's good and all, but under the same scenario, what if the German player had gone back and he just scrambled one fighter, and that created the sea zone? So that would mean that the attacker brought in these 5 ships that could do offshore bombardment, and they were stopped by one fighter. To me, that just kind of seemed kind of cheap, for lack of a better word. It just seemed very broken mechanic of it. Okay, well, you brought one fighter in, and now I can't. Now my 7 ships are essentially useless. My 5 that could do the offshore bombardment. Well, because of that, I really didn't care for that rule. So when I read the Division of Forces rule, the way that Global War 36 does theirs, I really liked that their amphibious assault rule. So we adopted it at the treehouse. So essentially what the Division of Forces rules is you split the attacker splits his forces up into the landing party, so the transports and the land ships, and then you have a screening force. So in this scenario, we would figure out how many ships we want in the screening force. So we'd probably put definitely the 2 destroyers, probably put 2 cruisers, and we'd probably move a battleship over here, just to make the quote unquote screening force as listed in the rules. So let's bring this extra fighter and the other tactical bomber back in here. I have OCD, can you tell? So now we have the screening force, and we have the offshore bombarding force, the force that's going to support the landing. So this is going to be the landing force. So where is all that going? Well, these 5 ships are going to battle the planes, and if these 5 ships have to win their battle for the landing craft to land. Now, looking at this battle, I would probably, in real life, probably bring in an aircraft carrier, or at least have this carrier sitting in this sea zone, and I would bring in the tactical bomber and the fighter, and either support the sea battle, or possibly the land battle as well. But this isn't real life. Not actually going to roll this out, but just kind of wanted to point that out, that I realize this is kind of lopsided, but in the same take. So if the sea battle occurs, let's just say these planes are successful and they wipe that entire screening force out. Well, all these guys have to retreat, and I'm not going to move that out of the way, but all these guys would have to retreat. They win, no landing takes place. But more than likely, I think the screening force could probably go, but they would definitely suffer some casualties. So let's just say all of the German planes are gone, and then both destroyers take a cruiser out too, and battleship probably took a hit on it. So that's what's left with the screening force, is left over after the sea battle. Say now the landing force can take place. So we move those guys around so they can offshore bombard, and then the transports move up and to land and try to take this territory back. But now that we did that, we saved these 2 guys out. We held them out of the sea battle so they can offshore bombard. So we'd have 1 bombardment out of 4 and 1 bombardment out of 3. To me, that just kind of feels a little bit cleaner. You did bring the defender did bring 3 aircraft to create the sea battle, or even if we had that cruiser in there, the sea battle happened. But it's not just, oh, you completely negated my offshore bombardment. I did have to make a tactical decision, strategic decision of what it did mess me up, but it didn't stop my offshore bombardment. And so if I can know going into it as an attacker, hey, I need to bring enough ships so I can get the offshore bombardment, then I think that's a little bit better, a little bit nicer, cleaner game. So along with that, bringing these forces in as well. So the next thing, going into the landing round of it, there's an attacker penalty, and this is straight from Der Künstler's Den, how DK plays. He adds an attacker penalty of using combat bonus chips, or what I'm calling combat bonus chips, CBCs. So the defender gains 3 CBCs, and these are just used as casualties. So on a hit, if you get a hit, you can take a chip off, and then you're down to 2. So essentially the first 3 hits the attacker gets, you can take chips off rather than actually having a casualty. And that's just kind of to help add into the difficulty of amphibious assaults. Some of the European amphibious assaults may not be as necessary. But over in the Pacific, I feel like you have some situations set up at the beginning of the game almost where you have one guy sitting on an island, and it doesn't take much just to come down there and wipe him out. Even though that one guy is really kind of a core, or more greater multiple divisions of troops, still one guy, but there still should be some difficulty to taking that island. So to me, it just kind of adds a little bit more realistic aspect to it. Although, there's that balance of it's a game and what's realistic and what's historical. You got to learn. I don't know. I guess you got to get to the point where you feel good with that equal balance. So this is pretty much the amphibious assault modifications. Like I said, just the big things are the division of forces. If the defender spawns a sea battle, and then the attacker penalty of the 3 combat bonus chips. Now, I know I said that you can pretty much pick and choose what rules you want to put in, but these next 2 rules, I would strongly suggest using them in tandem, and that's about submarines and combat air patrol. Essentially what I did was redefine some of the verbiage surrounding submarines, and here I got a German sub set up for us. And essentially what I've done is given subs the right to decline combat, so declination of combat. What does that mean exactly? Well, we all know that subs can have the choice to submerge as long as there's no enemy destroyer present. Well, we still have that right. They still have that right. But in addition to it, I've also given them the right to retreat. They also have the right to retreat. So essentially, the submerging is retreating within the same sea zone. But to early retreat is they can retreat out of the sea zone they're in and go to another sea zone. So essentially, it's just giving them 2 different options of how to retreat. So either they can submerge, and my submerge token chip there. So they can either submerge, or as I said, they can do early retreat into another sea zone. Simple enough. Well, why is this important, you ask? The one thing too so in addition to the submerging, so if a destroyer is present, then the destroyer is going to counter the submerging. So there's depth charges on the destroyer, and so he counters the sub from being able to submerge, but he can still retreat. Well, a combat air patrol being placed in the same sea zone, well, he makes the sub spotted where he can't do an early retreat, but he could still submerge if he wanted to. Add a destroyer and a combat air patrol, and you take away all of his declination of combat before combat occurs. Now, what is this thing you just said? A combat air patrol. What is that? Well, good question. So that's an additional rule that I've added, taken from the Global War series. And essentially what it's doing is you can place either a tactical bomber or a fighter in combat air patrol on a sea zone. So we can place them in a sea zone one territory away from any coastal territory or island. So now this fighter's in combat air patrol. So what does that mean? Well, he's in that sea zone, and if any enemy ships come in or aircraft come into this sea zone, he can attack them. And he's there on station to attack if he chooses to. Unless there's he can choose not to attack unless there's an enemy aircraft carrier coming in too. So what are the advantages of this combat air patrol, and why would I want to use it? Well, for the very reasons that we were just saying. We all know that submarines can come in and do a convoy disruption into certain sea zones, or that are marked with convoy markers. Well, you can have a destroyer sitting out here the entire time to counteract, to try to chase off the submarine, and that's still good and works. However, sometimes you need a little bit more firepower because the destroyer is only going to be shooting at a 2, whether if it's attacking or defending. That's not very high. You may want some extra firepower. So by bringing a combat air patrol out, then that combat air patrol can attack at in this case a fighter can attack at a 3. Gives you just a little bit more probability. A little bit more expensive unit, but you increase the firepower of him. Well, but as we all know as well, though, that planes can't hit subs without a destroyer present, and subs can't hit planes ever. So that same regard, what the combat air patrol is doing is it spots the submarine. So now the submarine is in the sea zone, he's spotted, and he can't do an early retreat. So you kind of lock him into this where he can't just run out. He has to wait for his turn to move when you spot him. So then you can bring a destroyer up, and you can force one round of combat with the submarine essentially, and you take away his early strike, his surprise strike, and all of that. The other advantage of the combat air patrol in regards to submarines, they take the submarine off station. So in the convoy disruption rules, if a submarine's in convoy zone, he can roll 2 dice to try to disrupt the convoy. Well, the combat air patrol takes the sub off station. The sub knows the plane's trailing him. They may be chasing around the whole sea zone for the entire turn, which 6 months is almost in the game. So they're sitting around here just chasing each other around the sea zone. He can't really get on station to disrupt all the merchant ships that you don't see, and so he can just roll 1 dice to disrupt the convoy. He can still disrupt it, but he can't get the full bonus that he was getting. The other thing, so that pretty much covers subs. It covers the combat air patrol and subs, but they can also attack just normal surface warships, and there's no special rules. He doesn't need the destroyer to attack them. He can just, a cruiser rolls in here, he can light him up. The other thing is with enemy aircraft, if say we're doing a combat air patrol coming from this direction, and the Germans move in from Norway, and if they're flying through to get to Scotland, well, they fly through this combat air patrol. This forces combat between the fighter and the combat air patrol. But if you match them 1 to 1, then you can fly a tactical bomber in there. So essentially, if you match him with a blocker, then the tactical bomber can come in and still do whatever he was going to do, whether it was a strategic bombing raid or support an amphibious assault, whatever it is you got going on. So that's one advantage, so that's one advantage with the combat air patrol. If you got a sea zone, you'd probably have an anti-aircraft gun around here, but you can launch a fighter off a coastal territory, almost kind of like an early detection system, especially if he's in a convoy disruption zone, to protect convoy disruption zone, and he can also catch enemy aircraft as they come in. The other thing that you can do is you can do a convoy. I keep saying convoy. You can do a combat air patrol off of a fighter. So say you have a fighter out in the middle, but you got a sub sitting out here and you're wanting to try to tie him down, and you have the fighter here. So you can put the fighter out to combat air patrol, and he can be out in the middle of the sea in a combat air patrol, and then this puts the sub as spotted. Now range. I don't know if I said it before. I've already forgotten. But a combat air patrol is a range of 1. I think I did say this. So you move 1 off the coastal territory, or you can move 1 space from the aircraft carrier. Now the aircraft carrier doesn't have to be stationary. The aircraft carrier can still move 2 if he wants to, 1, 2. But he needs to stay within a range of 1 of the combat air patrol, or else you lose the combat air patrol. If he went 1, 2, then this guy's an auto kill. He's gone. He's done at the end of the turn, unless you brought another aircraft carrier in, which I don't know how you could do that. But the only movement that the combat air patrol is allowed to do is from his takeoff spot. And if you move down here, then back to his takeoff spot. And if you have an aircraft carrier, then you need to reserve that slot. No other plane can land in it. He has to have a reserved slot for him on that aircraft carrier. One bonus to the range is if there's a operational naval base, the fighter or the aircraft can move to 2. You can move 2 away from this operational naval base, because really combat air patrol is a naval maneuver. It's not really a aircraft maneuver, so I gave the bonus to the naval base, not necessarily the air base. So that may be a little confusing, but I wanted to share a little love with the naval base there. So like I said, these 2 rules work good in tandem about submarines and combat air patrol, but I hope you enjoy them. And what do we have next? Carpet bombing. Next rule I got. It's almost kind of like a offensive AAA in a way. Essentially what you got is strategic bombers can run a carpet bombing mission, and this can be with or without a land attack or in support of another attack. So we can move our strategic bombers up here, and essentially what they'll get is you can roll 3 dice for each strategic bomber, and on a 2 or less they get hits, and those hits are removed right away. Now let's say under the scenario that there's no land attack to support the carpet bombing. Well, then the strategic bombers are subject to interception rules. If this fighter wanted to scramble and the AA gun, they can take shots from the AA gun. But if they are attacking and it's going to be in conjunction with a land attack or another attack, then they're not subject to interception, but just the anti-aircraft firing, and then they're held in that first round of combat, and they can be taken as casualties that first round of combat. But then after that first round of combat, they fly away. They go back. So that's pretty much strategic bombing, like I said, or carpet bombing rather, not strategic bombing. But carpet bombing done by your strategic bombers, and they roll 3 dice, and it's just kind of a big, massive carpet bombing. Heavy bombers can roll 5 dice each. And like I said, then it can be within supporting of the attack or not. Flanking bonus is my next rule, and kind of the and essentially this is another rule that Der Kunstler and has, and that I'm going to implementing. Essentially, you get a combat bonus chip, a CBC, for each additional direction that you're attacking a territory. So, say the British, the UK is going to attack Stalingrad, that's being held by the Germans. So, for every direction or territory that they're attacking from outside of their original attack, they get a bonus. So this would be one. This would be their original attack, and then this would be a second, or that would be one extra, two extra, three extra. So they can get up to three, and that's the maximum, three combat bonus chips that are going to be held to soak up their casualties. The flanking bonus just kind of to show if we moved all these in to attack, they're coming from all different directions, they're keeping the defenders on their toes, and the flanking just, they're being flanked, and so that gives the attackers an advantage because the defenders really don't know what direction they're coming from. So pretty simple. Like I said, any additional direction that they're coming from or territory that you're attacking from, you get one chip up to three. Defender retreats. So this is pretty much after the first round of combat. So of course the attacker can always choose to attack or not to attack, and then once they start an attack they can choose to call it off. Well, in out of box rules, the defender just has to sit here and live with it, whatever it is. So let's say the attack starts, and it's obviously not going to go well for the defender. They can go through the first round of combat, watch all the hits that are made by the attacker, and if they decide they don't want to fire back and retreat into another territory, they can do so. And that's pretty much it. The only caveats, you can only retreat once. So say they retreat back into here, and then there's another force that comes in and attack. Well, they can't retreat again because they've already retreated for that round, and that takes their movement points as well to retreat. And then while we're here, my next to last rule is Tankograd. So over here in Sumatra, and this one comes from General Hand Grenade. At the time that the Soviets go to war with Germany or Italy, they get a minor industrial complex built here in Sumatra to simulate the factories that were there already. However, that industrial complex can only build tanks, heavy tanks, or self-propelled artilleries, and they can build it for one IPC less. If Sumatra gets captured, this is destroyed and goes away. Nobody else can build out of that, and it doesn't get replaced or anything if it's taken back by the Soviets. So just a little quick, simple rule to help boost the Soviet economy there. And then finally, the last rule that we have is Young Grasshopper's house rules. We use these minus his Fortune of War module. So we incorporate the victory, his victory points, his victory objectives, both for the Axis and Allies, and the additional bonus income national objectives, along with the strategic bombing modifiers and so on and so forth. So you can download a copy of this from the cliffsidebunker.com and start playing with it yourself. But as I said, the next video that we're going to be getting into is my R&D rules, and we play with the Cliffside Bunker rules, with Young Grasshopper's rules, minus his Fortune of the War, which is his technology reward system, his technology system, and we played with ours. We just kind of felt like, despite the fact the changes, and it is better than out of box, it just wasn't enough change for us than out of box. So that's it. This is going to wrap up part one of Wildcat 6305's house rules. And like I said, I already got part two out there. We're going to make a part three and part four. Part three being covering my R&D rules, the governance of the rules, and then part four will be covering the actual text and what each technology does and what you can do with them.